Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, welcome to a new project, and this is the one I'm going to be using. McCalls 7537. Okay, and I'm going to be kind of doing a combination of a couple of them, because they give you different options. Like this one, they show where you can use different colored fabrics. This one has a ruching on the waistband. This one has ruffles and poofier long sleeves. This one has straight sleeves. So I am basically going to be making my dress this length, the longer length, using the different colors, okay? But I'm going to be doing these sleeves that look fuller. These are very straight sleeves. These are fuller sleeves that come in down here at the wrist. But I'm not doing the ruffles. So it's going to look like a combination of all of those. And I haven't exactly figured out which color is going to go exactly where, because I haven't cut out my pattern yet. So I'm not sure how much fabric I have and how to make it work. So we're just going to take this one step at a time, and let me show you what fabrics I'm going to use. So with this being a cold weather dress, I am wanting something nice and bright but cozy. Well, as cozy as it can be in a fitted dress, because this is fairly fitted and it does have a side zipper to get in, so it's not like super loose, but it'll be warm. So I'm doing corduroy again, and I am going to be using a combination of 3 different colors. This one, which is like an emerald green, which I love, and okay, so then I have this one, which is a very jewel toned purple color. Okay, so I think those 2 will be lovely. And I also have a burnt gold kind of color. So we're going to have a combination of this and this and this, which I think will be very fun and festive, So I also need to have a trim. It calls for grosgrain ribbon, but it wants you to put the grosgrain ribbon along these curves, okay? And if you look, it has the grosgrain ribbon around the curve in the back also. And I have been burned on trying to curve grosgrain ribbon before. So I'm going to skip that. I'm going to use a different type of trim, and it is this. I have a whole little spool of this stuff. It's just kind of fun. It has like this little imitation leather type stuff here, and it's kind of a pearly dark green color cables, but it does stretch slightly, and I think I can curve it very well. So I'm going to be running that around the dress. Wherever it has the grosgrain ribbon, I'm going to be putting this. So my first step is going to be to cut it out. Now for sizing for this, I'm picking a size that's going to work with my bust measurement and my waist measurement, but mostly my bust, because the waist, I can take that in pretty easily on the side if I need to. If you see up here, this is how we read these things. On size 16 for the bust measurement, you read, that over and down. It says for size 16, the bust measurement should be 38 inches, okay? But if you look down here, it says that the finished measurement, so that's The first one is your body, the second one is the garment. So this one down here, what the garment is going to be for that size is 43. Okay, so when you're looking to try to see what size, look at what your actual measurement size is, and then look at what the finished garment size for that will be, because sometimes they build in a whole lot of ease, sometimes they just don't. And it looks like on this one there's not a lot of ease into it, so you know I'll have to make that choice, but just pointing that out. Let me get started cutting it out. Okay, I have been strategizing cutting out my last piece of fabric. The purple one is in the dryer right now because I do pre-wash and pre-dry my fabrics. And I think I came up with a game plan. So let me get you a little closer here. All right, so I got my colored pencils out and played here. And so the green is going to be my sleeves. Now I'm doing these sleeves, but you know, the green is going to be the sleeves. And I'm going to use the green for the bodice front and bodice back. The purple I am using for this big facing area here where the grommets go through, or the eyelets, and this midriff piece, because I'm doing the one with two different colors, there's an upper and a lower, so the upper midriff is going to be in the purple, and then the main part of the skirt is. And then the lower midriff I'm doing in that burnt gold color. I have it on yellow here, but it's that burnt gold, and the lower ruffle. Now, when I was cutting it out, I am so used to doing all of the gathered ruffles where they're huge, but this is not gathered. This is just sewn on straight, so it's not a huge amount of fabric, which is nice to do a dress that's not a huge amount of fabric once in a while. So I have my pattern pieces just kind of situated by color. So like this one, these are the only two pieces I need out of the gold. And this is my piece for the purple. So I have everything stacked up, and that way I can just cut out one color at a time. So I'm going to start cutting out on my gold, and I'll do this for all of them, but for the fabric I have pre-washed and pre-dried, you know, but I haven't ironed it. I'll iron it as I need to, but I want to make sure that my fabric is on the straight. So I'm going to go ahead and just rip off a piece. I believe I ripped this one ahead of time and then serged it before I washed it, but just to make sure, so that I can match up these two and have it perfect. Now all of this stuff I'm doing is corduroy. So for every color I need to decide what is the top of my piece, okay? So if I decide this is the top of my piece, for this one, and this one only has a couple pieces, but like say if this was the purple or the green, I need to make sure that all of the pieces are aligned so that the same top is at the top. Otherwise, because it's corduroy and it has a nap, they'll look like different shades of a different color. Well, I think I just screwed something up in my coloring. Right off the bat, I was paying attention to something else and cutting stuff out, and I cut this part out from the green instead of the purple. And I don't have enough green left over to cut the sleeves out now. So, change in plan, the sleeves will now be purple. And this part of the skirt is going to be green. So we're going to have green, green, purple trim up here, purple sleeves. I think it'll still be fine. It's just not what I had planned in the first place. But you know what? I was distracted. I wasn't paying attention. And it may work out for the best. Sometimes these little, we'll do the Bob Ross happy accident thing. This may turn out to be a happy accident. Alrighty, so I have my fabric cut out now. And it's late, but I just got a spurt of energy, so I ran back up here to start sewing. So, looking at the layout of the instructions here, one major construction change that I can see I'm going to do is, like I said, there is a side zipper. See the little tab right there? That's their indication. There's a side zipper here. And it looks like what they're going to want you to do is basically build the bodice, build all this, and with everything put together, kind of try to get that zipper in, okay? What I think I am going to do is, because the zipper starts up here in the bodice, comes through the waist, and goes down here into the skirt, so I kind of have to have this whole assembly put together before I can put that zipper in. I am not going to sew, this is like no sleeves and everything. I am not going to sew this side. I am going to leave this entire side seam completely open so I can like butterfly this thing open and put the side zipper in that way. So other than that, I'm really going to try to follow their instructions. At this point, we'll see as we go on. So the first one I'm going to deal with is my front piece. And this corduroy will want to unravel, so I will be serging around the edges of my pieces. And so when I serge, I just go at the very edge. I just try to maybe take off some loose threads, but I don't try to take off strips of fabric. And I serge it after, in general, after I clip my notches. So they're not super noticeable, but if I keep my tissue paper pattern piece somewhat nearby and I can't find that little notch that I cut, if I refer back to the pattern piece, I get an idea of where it's supposed to be, and then I can look and then I can find it. So anyhow, what I need to do first is there's some circles on here I need to mark. So I get my piece of leather, and yes, this is real leather. It's stronger than vinyl or something, and I need that so that when I'm punching through, I don't go all the way through to my fabric. So I'm just going to punch out all of these circles, and then I will come back with my heat erasable pens. I'm going to use black. I think that will show up. Let me see. Yeah, well, I think the black will show up. And do that for both sides of this front piece. Now down here there's a bullseye which marks the fullest point on the bust, supposedly, okay? I did not make a lower bust adjustment on this. Thinking about it now, that might have been a wise thing to do. Okay, so as far as the order of events here, what I like to do for me is I will clip my notches, then serge them, because especially on something with a bias or something, it's nice to be able to lightly iron the piece before you mark it, because sometimes when you serge something then it's on a bias, it gets a little ruffly, and if you can just hit it with an iron, it flattens out. And then come back and draw all of my little dots on here, okay? That is lint, so that I don't erase those. So I have that done on my front two pieces. I need to come in between this dot here and this dot and run a couple rows of gathering stitches. It's not that long, but this fabric is thick enough that 2 rows will just make it easier. So I'm going to do that here, and they are going to have us put the facing on immediately after we're done. So I'm okay with that without reinforcing this edge. If we were going to be doing other things before we put that facing on here, I would probably run some stay tape or stay stitching or something at this angle just to keep it from stretching out of shape. But it looks like we're going straight from here into that, so we should be okay. Okay, before I put this piece away, this dot up here, I didn't notice it before, but it says this is for B, and view B is the one with ruffles. So since I am not doing the one with ruffles, I don't need to transfer this dot over. This one over here is the top placement mark for the zipper. Technically it only has to be on the left side, but I'm popping it onto both right now, because I might want to put the zipper on the opposite side. I haven't decided yet, but anyhow, I got all of this done here, and I've got my 2 rows of gathering threads down here. Anyhow, putting the front bodice aside, and grab my back bodice piece here. Same thing, I'm going to clip my notches, and when I do that, I just clip them about 1/4 inch in, okay? So that it's clipped all the way through the fabric, and I can find that. I will be serging around this entire piece and then coming back and marking the circles. Okay, so for my back, I've done the same thing. There it is, serged around the edge. One additional mark I did is I did draw a line down. I don't know if you can see. Right here, there's a, come on, focus. There's a faint blue line that I drew going straight up and down there, marking my center back because that's helpful. Now down here at the bottom, there are these 2 squares, one on each side, and I need to run 2 rows of gathering stitches between these 2 squares. And while I'm at the machine, up here at about 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to run a row of stay stitching, which is just a straight stitch set fairly short on something like this where it's a big curve, you know, and you want to keep it from stretching out of shape is why you do it. So starting up here at the very edge and running a row of stay stitching at 3/8 of an inch all the way over there, 3/8 to 1/2 an inch, and 2 rows of gathering stitches between these 2 dots. What I need to do is I'm going to sew these together at the shoulders. You know, I have a couple notches. I need to match those up. And when I sew it, I'll do it at 5/8 of an inch and press this open. So I will do this to both shoulders first. And then this is where it's going to be a little bit different because they're going to want you to go ahead and sew up the right side. I am not going to do that. At this point, I'm just going to leave the side seam open, but I am going to sew up the shoulders. All right, so I've got those green bodice pieces just set on my dress form and out of the way, and I need to start working on these facings. This is the part that's going to be going right in here, okay? And there are 2 of each, so I have 2 back pieces cut on a fold, and they want you to use sew-in interfacing for this. So I got my old bolt of sew-in interfacing. It says extra firm. It's basically like a starched muslin. You know, it's not super thick. So that's what I am using. And for this front piece, there are 2 complete sets. So a right and a left and a right and a left. Okay. So what I need to do, because they want us to use the sew-in, is take 1 of each set, take my interfacing and baste around the edges to attach my interfacing to my piece here. And if your interfacing is really thick, since we're doing sew-in anyway, if you wanted to trim some of the edge so that your seam allowance is empty and so it's not going to be super thick when you turn it in, that might be a good thing. All right, so I have 1 piece of interfacing pinned onto 1 piece of my fabric coordinating piece, and this is one of my front pieces. Now what I'm doing is coming along and just very quickly making a dotted line of where a 5/8 inch seam allowance is. And again, I'm using a snipped off piece of an old measuring tape because that is 5/8 inch wide, which makes it, you know, easy peasy for a gauge. And before I start basting, what I'm going to do is come in here at the corners and just slip my scissors in between there and just cut off the corners of the interfacing, leaving the fabric whole. Come on, like this, okay? So when I'm done, what I'm going to have is a back piece that looks like this with these corners cut off, and this. And I like to draw these on because it gives me a very good guide of where I'm going to baste it on. And when I baste, I don't want to actually stitch it on those lines. I want to do it like 1/8 of an inch or so inside of it, but still having this line on there, it's going to make it easier for me to go towards where I want to go. So I'm going to be using a somewhat matching thread. I think I have a dark purple. If not, I'll find a dark blue or something that'll blend with this. I have so many different colors of fabric going to be going on this dress. I'll probably just find a happy medium. All right, and so I am taking fairly large stitches. They are probably, you know, about 3/8 of an inch long, but it's enough to hold it on. So as you can see, my stitches are, get down, about 1/8 of an inch below my 5/8 inch mark, you know, so they won't be visible, but they are going to be close enough to the stitching line that they will serve their purpose. All right, so now that that's done, I have a lot of circles I need to punch out. Some are for my view, some are not. I'm doing such a hodgepodge combination. The one that says view C does not have the ties. I want the ties like this, okay? So I'm going to punch out the holes for view D that are on here. So I need all of these extra ones. I'm going to be marking them on the wrong side, but I have a feeling that when the time comes to actually put the grommets on, I'll be remarking it, but for right now, that's good. So I've got this center front here, which will be something I'm going to use very soon for sewing. And the rest of these up here are for grommets. So I'm punching those out. And then up here, oops, didn't get that one quite. Up here in the corner, the triangle is a shoulder placement one. So I'm going to grab that. And so I'll just be placing this on top here. Oh, I think I have this upside down. There you go. Getting my heat erasable pen and just marking all of these little circles. Need to turn off my notifications. I'll just be marking all of these circles all the way up here. Now this one up at the top corner, it just kind of disappeared, so I'll put like a little bullseye around it so I know that that is there. Same with this one down here. It's kind of disappearing. But these two down here, those are the main ones that I need to be concerned with for the next step. Okay, so now I have my back piece right side up. I'm going to take these pieces and correctly, remember the one with the triangle is the shoulder and it has a notch up here that gets matched. Putting these together up here and going to sew across the top at 5/8 of an inch and then press these seam allowances open. Now here's the thing, I am leaving my basting stitches in. I just want to, I don't see the point. If you were, another option is if you're going to be pulling your basting stitches out, what you do is, just like I did 1/8 of an inch on this side, you do 1/8 of an inch on the interior side, okay? So if you're going to be pulling them out, put them here. That way, after you're done stitching and everything is enclosed, you can pull them out easily. So there's that option. So I'm going to go ahead and sew straight across here and press these tops open. All right, so now that I have that done, while I was at the ironing board pressing these opens, I went ahead and hit all of the spaces that did not have marks I wanted to save. So I did not iron these dots, but I ironed all the way around so that all of my little marks that I drew for my seam allowance have disappeared. You know, makes them a little cleaner, So what I need to do now, there's two steps. First, there is a notch on this edge right here, and they want you to stay stitch from this notch all the way down. And I'm guessing that's because this is a curve that we might be clipping later. So I will do that. I'm going to do my stay stitching at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance down here, just because my thread does not match this exactly and I don't want it to show. So I'll do that to both sides. Also, these bottom two dots here, those match up on both sides, and I need to stitch just between those two dots, I believe. I can't really tell from the diagram if we're supposed to sew underneath this one or not, so just to be safe, I am not. I'm going to stop my stitching at that lower circle, so it looks like about 2 inches of stitching I'm going to be doing there to hold these two edges together. Okay, so I'll be doing that, and then stay stitching at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way up from the bottom of these front facings until the notch. Okay, so my stay stitching is basically running along the same place that my basting stitches were. And here, what I need to do, now that I have it sewn together, is clip to right about where the top of that stitching line is, so that these two can open that way, and they want the top part of the clip sides to come outward like that. Okay, so they're off to the side like that. All right, so now I need to go get my bodice and put it together. Now, according to their diagram, we've already sewed the side seams on my bodice. I'm not doing that yet, obviously. So we're just gonna pretend that all is good. Let me go get my green pieces. All right, so I'm getting ready to pin my facing. Actually, this is the front part. The facing technically is the one that has no interfacing on it, but my edge to my bodice. So I'm laying them both right side down so I can make sure that I'm lining things up properly. So I'm just going to start up here at the shoulders, making sure that both seam allowances are pressed open, and pin those. Then I will pin the center back, and then match the notches, and then match the bottom side. And then once I have all of those major landmarks pinned together, then if there's any easing or clipping or anything that needs to be done after that, that's when I will do that. So I'll be right back. So I don't know if you can see, but it's snowing. Wet snow. Very wet snow. So it is winter. Again, I'm going to assume that this is my official it is winter. That down there is the outhouse. When we first moved here, that was our bathroom. Fun days. Anyway, back to sewing. Okay, so this is my shoulder seam. This is my center back. You remember there's some stay stitching around the back neck. So on the bodice side of that back neck, I am making clips probably about 1 inch apart up to, excuse me, up to that stay stitching. And that is going to make it so that this bodice back piece is going to flex out so it will match up to my neck facing piece. So let me go ahead and pin this so that can line up there nice and flat. And then with the front, it's the opposite. We need the front facing piece to be able to be clipped and curved. Okay, so now working on the front piece. This is my shoulder, this is my notch. This is where my notches are matched up, okay? So from the shoulder to where those notches are, it will lay pretty flat. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pin that down. It's below the notches where we did that stay stitching. So the stay stitching is important, that we're going to be making it curve to fit the bodice. So turning it facing side up now, I'm going to make some clips up to, but not including, my stay stitching along this side. Okay. So now with that, these threads out of the way, I should be able to move my facing piece, and it should be able to flex enough that I can line up the very edge of this facing piece with the edge of my bodice piece. Okay, so now I can go ahead and pin this on, and I'll do the same thing to the other side. And then once I have this all pinned and I can make it so that it'll lay nice and flat under my sewing machine, I'm going to come back and stitch this at 5/8 of an inch from the very bottom all the way around to the other side. Okay, so I've got it sewed, and I need to press this whole seam allowance towards the band. So I'm just kind of laying it flat. Kind of work my way around here. After I get it pressed, I'll be trimming it. But I kind of want it to, I want to see how it's going to lay first. So that is the back part. Turn my little piece here. Push this towards the band up here. Up in the front. that side, which is nice. It's doing well. The clipping is doing its thing. And now up over here. Okay, so let me go ahead and flip it right side out. We can see what this is going to look like. Very bright. It looks pretty good. I don't really see any puckers that I need to deal with, so that's nice. So what I need to do then is come on this side, and I am going to trim this edge with pinking shears. I'm going to trim it so that I still have at least 3/8 of an inch on the inside, but with the pinking shears, that's going to help it with all of these curves and take the bulk out of the finished facing so that all the seam allowances aren't, you know, really thick right there. So like this is my front area here. I'm just going to come in with my pinks and trim it so it's right about there. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way around. All right, I need to start working on these facing pieces of my band, and so I have notches clipped on the outside edge, and just like the other one, I need to stay stitch from those outside edge notches all the way down to the bottom at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I also am putting these two, oh, I need something white to mark it, but I'm going to transfer these two front dots down here. I don't usually like to use the white heat erasable pens because they just don't work as well, but you know what? I can't find my other pencils, so today is the day. And if you don't have any of these, they're fabulous. The white's not as good as the colors, but it will work. And with the white, when you use it, at first it looks like it's not showing up. So like, this is the wrong side, but I'll draw and it looks like it's not going to show up. But as you wait a little while, it does. So it's kind of deceiving, you know. So anyhow, I'm going to use my white pen, mark these two front dots here, and these two here. And so after I stay stitch these at 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew these together between those two dots right here. All right, so that is done, and so now I am pinning the shoulder seams together, and I would, just like the other one, I'm going to sew this at a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then come back and press them open. So what the instructions want you to do at this point is turn this outside edge into 5/8 of an inch, you know, clip where you need to, and press it in. So it's going to be pressed like that before we sew it on. I am not going to do that. I will be turning it in when I'm ready to go ahead and baste it in place. So what I'm going to do now is get ready to sew this center part onto the center part that I have sewed onto the bodice. So here is, you know, obviously the one sewed to the bodice. I'm going to place this on top, matching up my shoulders, matching my center back, matching everything else, just pinning it in place first of all. Okay, so remember on the interfaced side, I clipped it there at that dot so I could pull this up, okay? So it's like this here, and I have this side of the seam allowance pulled through. I did not clip the non-interface side. So because of that, what I'm going to do is I have it pinned all the way around, and I can fold this side down out of my way, start sewing here, sew all the way around, come back to this side with this part here folded out of the way, and finish it up to this point where everything comes together. So that is at 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and sew that right now. Okay, so I've got it all stitched. You know, everything's coming together at this point. So from the right side, it's kind of like this, okay, where it all just kind of comes together there. So what I need to do now is do some understitching. And remember, in understitching, the seam allowance always goes towards the private side, and this uninterfaced side is the private side, okay? So with the seam allowance pulled this way, what I'm going to want to do is run a row of stitching on the underneath side about 1/8 of an inch in over here from the seam edge all the way around, making sure that all of this seam allowance is pressed that way. Okay, so it's been a few hours. I actually ran out of bobbin, broke a thread, got distracted, went downstairs. I've been down there for a while in the kitchen and just came back up here to work on this again. So I finally got it understitched all the way around up to this point. I need to trim this thread here. And so now I should be able to flip this all over to the back side, pull my facing through, and remember I did not trim this or anything ahead of time. So right now what I need to do is, again, I'm going to use my pinking shears and trim off the edge, but also I'm going to need to clip this back so that it will lay flat. So I'm going to actually do that first, and then I'll come back and pink once I know where everything is. So you can see this row that's closest to my finger here, that's the understitching, that's the main seam. But now that I've clipped it, it's going to turn nicely. Okay, so here's a thought. I am going to be putting grommets and ties here. Now the tie is really more decorative than anything else. It's not like it's a corset or something that's really cinching in. It's more just lovely. So if it was really under pressure, I would be using an extra stabilizer in here, but since it's just for decoration, I'm not. So I will be pinking this about the same as on this side and making any clips along the way that I need to so it will lay flat. All right, so I trimmed it actually a lot closer than the other side, this side over here. I trimmed it probably, what is that, like a fat 1/8 or a 1/4 inch away from my understitching because I want to make sure it lays nice and flat. So now I can turn the whole thing, and I might go over to my ironing board and press it just so I get a nice edge over here on this inside edge like this before I actually start turning this underneath. So let me just go ahead and press this really quickly, and it is corduroy, so I don't press it super hard, but with steam I can press it enough that I can make it pretty flat and still not destroy the texture of it. Okay, so now that this edge is pressed, I need to come back and turn this under so that it's going to line up with my seam allowance. And if there's a place that you need to clip, go ahead and clip it. Like I can tell that it would make it line up a lot easier if I had a little bit of ease right there. Okay, so I can just pin it under like that so that it matches up with the stitching line. So here you can see there's my stitching line, and I'm just barely covering it with the edge of my fabric, and that's why I like to turn it under afterwards, because sometimes if you press it under before, it doesn't line up quite right. So I'm going to go ahead, work my way around, pin it under, and then I will come back and just slip stitch this so it will be invisible to the right side, just with a little needle and thread. I also wanted to point out along the back, even though yes, you can turn it under without clipping it, I just made some notches. Now sometimes it's better to cut out like a wedge when you're doing a curve that's going this way, because when you turn it right side in, they'll all come together. For me, for this one, if I just make little notches, they can kind of overlap each other instead of just bunching up. Okay, so I have it pinned all the way around. It's going to lay nice and flat. So this is the wrong side, and this is the right side. Just ignore my little lint things that are sprinkled around there. So from the right side, it looks like really nice. And the way that I'm sewing this is, if you can see where my stitching is, I don't want my needle and thread stitches to show from the right side. So I'm just coming over here right where that stitch is, catching that stitch, some of the seam allowance underneath, some of the very edge, pushing it up. Okay, So it's basically just going to wrap that purple around. So I just catch that stitch, some seam allowance, and goes straight up. So nothing too fancy, but it will work to hold this edge down really nicely. Good morning and welcome to the next day. So I wanted to give you a little view of what this looks like right now. And also, remember when we were sewing that front couple inches on here? I said, I don't know if I should go all the way past. Go all the way past. Go all the way down to the edge of the fabric. You know, that makes sense. So when I got down here, I just closed it up by hand, but you can go ahead and stitch it all the way down when you're sewing the two pieces together. So I haven't gathered anything. I still have my gathering threads hanging down here. I got my shoulder seams pretty well lined up with where they're supposed to be. So you can see that the bottom of this piece is right below bust level. It's going to be a really wide waistband, and I think that's going to work out pretty well. I don't have the sides pinned together, but it is going to be fairly fitted. This is the back here, and so, you know, be aware of that it is fairly fitted, and make any adjustments you need to. If you have a waist that, if the bust fits but the waist is a little bit too small, it would be fairly easy at this point to just not gather this as much and adjust your waistband pieces to fit your size, you know. So say your bust fits like a size 14 and your waist fits like a size 18. There's a chance, you know, I haven't proven this yet, but there's a chance that you could cut out the size 18 waistband and then just not gather it as much, you know. Figure something like that out. That makes sense to me. Anyhow, what I'm going to be doing is working on the waistband piece and then working on the skirt, but keeping the sides open so that then I have a nice easy place to work on my side zipper. So that's going to be my next step today, is working on the waistband pieces. All right, so what I have is piece number 7 is the upper, piece number 8 is the lower. And there are 4 cut out. They're cut out on a fold, so I have 4 long strips of each. And I need to put interfacing on 2 of each. So I'm just going to set 2 aside, and I'm going to be using the same sew-in interfacing that I used before. Not sure which side is right side up. This is just a very old one, but it's basic sew-in interfacing. Doing it the same method that I did before, where I am going to cut out my piece from here, and then once I have it cut out, pin it to my fabric, add my stitching line with my little piece of trimmed off measuring tape to get my 5/8 inch seam allowance along the edge, and then come back and baste it with a matching thread. You don't need to watch all of that again. It's the same thing I did on those front purple pieces, but I'm going to be doing that to 2 of the bottom and 2 of the top. All right, so I have these all done. So before I iron it, it looks like this, with my corners cut, basting around it. I still have the line here where I marked my seam allowance. I'll iron that off. This is the lower midriff part here. This one I have already ironed, so my little lines are gone. And I have a notch that I clipped, and I have a little square and a little circle. So I am just marking those little square and circle on here. And I will probably draw a line approximately where the center front is, just to, or center back, you know, it's the same. The front and back pieces are the same for these guys. So I'll be marking those. So it's these circles here that I just made. And the same for the bottom part. There's some notches to clip. It doesn't have any dots on the bottom part, but let me go ahead and finish marking this. So just a quick little aside. At this point, I should be adding trim to my bodice. And at the beginning, this is the one that I was thinking of doing here. And I just held it up onto my dress form. I think it's too busy. And so I got out a black version, and I don't like it. And I think that just having the color option is good enough. I think that if I try to add trim to this, it's going to be too much. And the version that has the ribbon on it is a single color, so it's the ribbon that adds some difference to it. So because I'm doing something kind of similar to this, where I have basically 3 different colors going, that's good enough. I don't need to put the trim on here. I am going to be doing the laces and grommets. That's still a thing. But as far as using trim to define the seam lines, I am skipping that part. So I'm going to put my trims away. Okay, so I am constructing my waistband as front and back. So the purple is the upper, the gold is the lower. So I'm just going to match these up together. I've got a couple notches here to line up. Going to pin those together, matching those notches and the ends down here. Hopefully everything will line up, and I'm going to be sewing these at 5/8 of an inch across. All right, so I've got them sewed together and I press them, and I don't know if you can tell, but for me, I can see quite a defined line on here where the seam allowance is on the bottom. And I don't like that, so while it's in 2 different sections, I'm going to go ahead and pink just the very edge of this, okay? Because that way, if I press it again later or something, there's not going to be one defined edge, and that's going to blend a whole lot better on this side. So I'll go ahead and pink the seam allowances on both of these, and then what I'm going to do is sew the non-interfaced versions together just like this, you know, with the purple on the top, gold on the bottom, just like this. So I'll have 2 sets, one set with interfaced and not, and another set with interfaced and not. Okay, so now I am going to start attaching these things. And so I'm taking my piece that has the interfacing and these dots that I drew on the upper midriff, where they are going to match up is at the beginning and ending of my gathering stitches. So let me just actually start pinning these together. I'm going to pin the side seams up to where this gathering stitch should start. So again, where this circle is. Come on, fingers. It's getting colder out and fingers don't want to work as well. Okay, and then over here, I will be putting this side up and pin it from here to here. Okay, and now I can match up where it's only a couple inches on here. This point matches up where the gathering stitches ended, which is about 1/2 inch from where the purple band starts. So I'm just going to put a little pin there. The same thing over here. And hopefully this will lay pretty flat, and it does right there, so that's always a win. So I'm just gonna put a couple pins in this center part here. Looks like a lot of thickness. Now we still have one other layer to put on. I'm going to be putting the facing layer on the other side, so we will just flatten it out and grade it as we need to. Okay, all right, so that's what it looks like on this side, pretty flat here. So what I'm going to do is flip it over so that the wrong side is up. And actually, when I was sewing this, my bobbin threads are the ones that are on my wrong side, I believe. I should have marked them. I did not, but yeah, they are. I can always tell because the bobbin threads pull a lot easier than the needle threads. So let me go ahead and gather my bobbin threads up so that this part is gathered up nicely between those 2 pins. All right, so I've got it just pinned here in place, and I need to base this. I'm actually going to do it on my machine, and I'm going to be doing it at about a 3/8 inch seam allowance straight across because I'm going to be making another seam at 5/8 in just a minute, and I don't want my basting to show. Alrighty, so my big machine basting stitches here. This dot is at 5/8 of an inch. This is shorter, so you can see my basting stitches are in far enough. They won't be seen unless, you know, I go totally off the rails next time. So Now I can pull off all those pins, and I need to get one of these pieces I just made that does not have interfacing on it. And I'm going to match it up here. Get it pinned so everything aligns straight across here. And then when this one is on, then I'm going to sew it across here at 5/8 of an inch. All right, so it's all sewn together here. Plenty thick in the middle. Super thick, so going to need to do some grading. So what I'm going to do is find a pair of scissors here. I'm going to be trimming the piece that I put on first, and I basted it on at 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to be trimming this one just past that basting stitch. Okay, so it's basically only going to be, you know, maybe 1/4 of an inch long, but it's going to be reinforced by that basting stitch. Then the middle part, and that's the part with most of this bulk here, I'm going to make that one about 1/8 of an inch longer. And the purpose of all of this is to stagger the thickness so that I'm not having a huge bulk. I have a layer of fabric with my interfacing, a layer of fabric, a layer of this. Okay, so just doing that, it's going to lay a whole lot nicer here. You know, I don't have one big bulk right there and everything. So I like that. I think it's actually looking really kind of neat. Very vibrant. So I have this part here in the back. On the inside, it looks the same, like this. Now what I need to do before I go on is put the corresponding waistband part onto the back. So I'm going to do exactly like I did on the front. Remember, we have gathering stitches that are going from like midway here to here. So let me push those out, get my interfaced piece, and do the same thing. I'm going to pin it on up to the point where I have all of my gathering threads to work in the middle. So we're using the same marks for gathering stitches, which is interesting here. So on the front, we gathered between these two, okay? For the back, we're gathering between these two. All right, so I've got it pinned like that, and now just like the other one, I'm gonna flip it over this way and go ahead and pull my bobbin gathering stitches here so that I can get this part all nice and neat. Now I'm gonna match up. I remember I drew a center back line here. I'm gonna go ahead and put a pin there so I can see it easily. Match that up with the center point between these two, which is right here. I thought I had marked my center back. Oh, yep, there I did. I had marked my center back. I thought I erased it all, but it's right there. So I'm going to go ahead and match up my center back of my bodice to my waistband, pin that in place, and go ahead and gather these two so it's nice and flat right there. Now there's all different ways to deal with the tails at the end of gathering stitches. Sometimes I save them, sometimes I don't. For right now, what I'm doing is just once I get it to the point where I've got all the gathers in on that side, I make a big loopy knot, stick a pin through it, and pull it down. And that way I have them both tied together at that point, and I can just trim them off like 1 inch or so beyond that. And that way I don't have huge things, especially when I'm dealing with a project that's going to have several layers on it. It's just easier for me that way. So I'm going to go ahead and do it on this side too. Okay, now just like the front, I am going to base this on with my machine at 3/8 of an inch straight across here so I can pull all of these pins out. So at this point, I finished the back the way I did the front, you know, with putting on both layers, grading it the same up here. So it's laying the same very nicely. And I took it over and tried it on my dress form. It was very tight, got concerned. I actually tried it on my body. Very tight. Yes, I can put it on, but there is like not much ease at all in this pattern. At least as far as when I get this size of pattern in McCalls, and this is a McCalls pattern. Usually I have a lot more ease into it. This is designed with very little ease. It's like a 50s dress, you know, where it's very tight up here. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be a little bit looser. It kind of gives that impression, but it's not. And so at this point, I have to decide what I'm going to do about it. I don't really want to do any major renovations on this thing, you know. It's looking pretty, it's just going to be super tight. So what I've decided I'm going to do is take very small side seam allowances up here. I think that I can add just enough that it'll be a little bit more comfortable on me. So instead of a 5/8, I'll probably do like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that might make it a little bit tricky with my zipper, but I'll see what I can do about that when that time comes. But I just wanted to give you a heads up because I think that I wasn't paying that close attention to it, because looking at this, I was like, oh yeah, that's going to fit my waist. I wasn't thinking, oh, but this is actually going around my rib cage. You know, it's a lot higher than what a waistband normally would be. So anyhow, just thought I would mention that. So I'm going to be doing small seam allowances, but on the pattern instructions, they want me to skip over and start putting on sleeves. I am not doing that yet. What I am going to start is the skirt piece that's going on the bottom here, because as soon as I can get the skirt pieces attached, then I can put in the zipper and go ahead and finish up my side seams. So I'm going to get out my piece 11 here. I've cut 2 of them on a fold, and I'm going to serge around each piece. All right, so I have it serged around the edges, and there's a notch up at top I need to make sure I mark. But now I need to run gathering stitches up along the top edge of these pieces, these piece number 11s of both of them. And I am not sewing them together yet. I'm still doing them separately, but 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top of both pieces, and then I will assemble them onto my bodice. So I got the gathering stitches put onto the top piece of the skirt. I'm going to go ahead and sew the bottom piece onto each individual one, so when I do the side seam, it's the entire side seam. I will not be hemming this bottom piece until I have the entire dress completed, but I am putting this seam on to connect the 2 right now. So, just like the other one, what I need to do is, you know, I have 1 notch on here that I need to clip, but I'm going to go ahead and serge around each piece before I sew it onto the upper skirt part. All right, so now that I have the bottom band here serged, I'm going to go ahead and sew it to the top. And the top part, it's interesting because the top part, the hem is slightly curved, but the bottom band is basically just a big rectangle, but it fits. It fits really well. So I'm going to go ahead, pin my ends, pin my centers. There is a notch that you can match in there. I'm actually just kind of splitting the difference each way. And once I have all that done, I will come back and sew this at 5/8 of an inch. And it looks like we're going to be pressing all of the seams up. We're not going to be splitting them open, but we're going to be pushing both of them up. Well, if I push it that way, it looks like it's down, but once from this side, they'll be going up. All right, so I'll show you my skirt in a second, but I was thinking that it might be easier to put my grommets on now before I attach my skirt. But then I decided, you know what, I want to wait until I can actually try it on, just in case I want to alter the position of those eyelets on here for some reason, depending on exactly how my body works, because you never know. You never know. It might be better to have them higher or lower or something like that. So I'm going to hold off putting all my eyelets and everything in here until one of the very last steps. So with that, I have done both of the skirt pieces, and after I sewed the bottom to the top, I went back and I ran a top stitch of up here, the green is the top, pushing the seam allowance up towards the top. Okay, and that's going to give it extra strength to make sure it doesn't come off. but also it'll help that lay flatter, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and connect this to my bodice. So I'm only going to be sewing it to the front piece. The back one I'm just folding up out of the way. I'm going to put my front piece down there, get the gathering stitched side. I've got all my gathering stitches here, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and pin that to my bodice. There'll be the exact same method for the front as for the back, okay? I'm going to match up my sides, my centers. There's a notch halfway right here that I'll match up, and then go ahead and pull my gathering threads so it's all nice and flat straight across here. Okay, got it all pinned on, gathered up. And what I'm going to do now is, while I'm looking at it with this side up, so I can make sure everything stays nice and straight, I'm going to go ahead and sew it at my 5/8 of an inch, but that way I can make sure, because I did this row at 1/2 inch, I can make sure that my row of stitching is going to be further in than my gathering stitches, and I can keep everything nice and straight. So go ahead and sew that. And I'm going to do the very same thing on the back side. Gather it up just like this and sew it on just like that. All right, so I got it sewed. Okay, let me move the camera in there. All right, so I have it sewed here, and I was trying to be very careful when I was stitching it that I did not catch any of these things up here, you know, wonky one way or another. So after I sewed it, I lightly pressed it so the seam allowances are going to want to go up, and it flattened this out a little bit, just a little bit. And so then I can bring the inside part down, turn the edge under now, so that way I can make sure that my edge, is turned under, and I can pin it so it is just at that stitching line, and do it all the way up to the edge. And then I'm going to come back with a needle and thread and just slip stitch this part down on the inside invisibly. So I can start here and just slip stitch it all the way across. Again, I will be doing it the same exact way for the back as I am for the front. So when I get done, I will have a complete front and a complete back that I can then put together. All right, so I'm having an issue and going to share it with you. I was honestly going to try to hurry up and rush this thing to get it done today so I could edit it and get it uploaded for this weekend, but I've got a lot of things going on and I need to redo some things on this. So this video might be a little bit late, but let me show you what I've got going on here. Do you see, well, you know what? Let me show you on the pattern first, and that'll explain this. Okay, so first off, let me say that you see this delightful little girl here? This dress was made for her. And what I mean by that, it was made for a slender person, a young, when her bust is nice and perky. You know, it's designed for that. If you look at the pictures and the way that the gathers, it's hard to see here because, you know, it's very patterned in the fabric. But if you look here, it looks like there's all this gathering here, and that the fullest part of your bust should be right about here. Okay, that's how it looks in all of these pictures. It is not the case at all. Even if, well, here, let me just look at this. This is the pattern, and like I said, it was designed for a very young, perky, busted girl, okay? So let's take the seam allowance out of here. Don't know why that's not working. Get a different pin. Okay, I'm going to take the seam allowance out, and this is just, you know, assuming that all is right with the world. That is putting the, according to them, the fullest part of the bust 1.5 inches above this line, okay? So it's also putting, if you take that across, the fullest part of the bust. If I take the seam allowance out up here and bring that over, it is putting the fullest part of the bust at about 2 1/8 inches below this fitted sleeved armhole. Okay, so if you measure yourself from where, like if you have a tailored top or something on, where that seam starts to 2 1/8 underneath, I am nowhere near the fullest part of my bust. You know, I might be venturing towards that area. Over here, this is for a bust that is looking everybody in the eye, you know? My bust is looking at their toes, and it's much lower. This is an extremely optimistic bust. This is a bust of a very slight figure. And that might be you, and that's okay. I'm just saying that it's not me. So if I knew this ahead of time, what I would actually, just, you know, brainstorming here, what I am saying is for even an average body type, this is optimistic. I'd say for an average, it's closer to here, okay? I'm saying for me, it's here. That's what I'm saying, okay? So make sure you look at everything. And that is why I'm having trouble with my waistband, because they are basing the waistband placement on an extremely high waistband to start with, but also an extremely high waistband based on an outrageously extremely high bust. And so anyhow, all of that venting being done, there's two things I want to show you. One is how, if I knew this ahead of time, how I would adjust my pattern to fit an average, you know, regular woman size body. And so I will do that. And then after that, I'm going to show you how I'm going to tweak my project that's really mostly made at this point, just so it's going to be wearable for me. So let me get a piece of tracing paper down here and we will get started. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is decide if you are comfortable with the size zipper that the pattern calls for, or if you want to extend your zipper to be even longer. A longer zipper will give a bigger opening to get into. That's what I'm feeling on this. I don't want to shorten myself in that way at all. And because I'm choosing that, I'm going to make my adjustment below this point. This is the point where the top of my zipper should be. I'm going to leave that where it is, so I'm going to end up using a slightly longer zipper than what they call for. So I'm lining up, I got my grid behind me here, and I am lining up this grain line here along this grid, okay? So with that grain line there, I am going to draw a line at exactly 90 degrees to it, all the way over to this side. Okay, I've actually changed my mind on where I'm going to cut this across. If you look here where this is curving in, I want to make my adjustment at the point where it's going straight down, okay? So it looks like once it hits right about here, that's good. So I'm actually going to leave this up there and bring this down. And this is all just a lengthening of the torso type of an adjustment. It's not adding a fuller bust or anything like that. It's basically just a droopier bust. Fuller bust adjustments are a totally different thing, and what I would suggest is you just cut out a bigger size. Because this is gathered, there's not like a specific dart pointing at your bust, and since it's gathered, if you just do a bigger size, it should accommodate. So anyhow, but this, even if you do a bigger size, you're going to need a lengthening if you're shaped anything like I am. So I got a line coming across here based on what this grain line is right there. So let me get my scissors here, and I'm going to go straight across like this. Okay, so again, this is assuming that at this point it's straight, all right? So I'm going to line this up here, get a piece of tissue paper, tracing paper. This piece is much too long. I'm just going to cut a strip across. And I'm going to tape my top onto my tracing paper. Okay, so this is taped on. I have this placed so it's still lining up on my grid. And now what I need to do is decide how much lower I want this to be. Now, with the understanding that, yes, the designer intended for this, see the bottom of, okay, look, see the very bottom of that waist, okay, which is about 5 inches. This whole thing here is about 5 inches. It's that very, very bottom seam that is actually the waistline. So if you knew what your measurement should be from this point to your actual waist and you wanted to subtract out the other additional, you could do that and you could get a very precise measurement here. I'm going to eyeball this thing just from when I tried to work it on my dress form, tried to work it on my body and everything. I'm going to give myself a full inch below what they're calling for. Okay, so you know what? My gut says give me 1.5 inches. At the worst, it'll blouse a little bit, but I should have a lot more freedom of movement. So what I'm doing is where this green line is on that grid, I'm continuing it down here, still on that grid, and I am going to tape it on here. I can see that that is about 1.5 inches right there on that side, and the same, about 1.5 inches spacing on this side. And then I can take my ruler and from this top point here to the bottom point there, just going to draw a new line. I need to get a new pen for my sewing table. And trim this at that new line. Which is going to be right here. And that is going to be my new pattern. Just trim it here and trim, you know, this will continue to be the bottom. I'll just trim this excess off of that. And now I need to work on the back piece. Okay, so I have trimmed the excess off of here. This is my front piece now. Set that aside for just a minute. This is my back piece. And I am going to be trimming this putting my fold line on my up and down of my grid. Stick a weight up here to hold it. I'm going to go get a different pencil. Hang on a second. Okay, so I'm just going to put my front piece on here and mark about where I made that cut on this side, just so it's, you know, similar placement. So here is where I need to make it. Okay, so I'm lining this up again up here on my grid line. I have marked my edge where I want the line to be, and I'm going to again make a crosswise line that is 90 degrees to this line. So I can line my ruler up. That looks pretty good, right about there, I would say. It's not exact with the front, but it's pretty darn close. Oh, this pencil. Ugh. Anyhow, it's at about a 5/8 inch seam allowance on this side. I can tell it because it goes right through that line. But what I'm going to do is cut this on that line I just drew. And again, get a little piece of tracing paper. I almost did it all upside down. And tape the top piece to my tracing paper. Now relining up this side here with my fold, with my grid over there. Put this up there. You know what, I'm going to move it up so the bottom of this pattern is at about 1.5 inches. So what I want to do is line this up so this fold line is still on that grid. This is the bottom of that fold line. I'm going to place it down here, which looks like about 1.5 inches below. Stick a little piece of tape there to hold it in place. Okay, come over to this side, make sure it is also at 1.5 inches. All right, put my other piece on top of it just to make sure that it is the right length, and it is. Okay, put a couple more pieces of tape down here in the middle. And now get my ruler and draw a line from the top here to the new corner, bottom corner here, which will go like that. Okay. So that is going to be my new sideline, and then trim off the excess down here. You know, this is a fold line, but I can trim it at the fold line or wherever if I need to. And those are going to be my new 2 pieces. And again, this is just for lowering the bust to be a more generic size. I measured on me, and if I take from the seam allowance here to the seam allowance here, and I add about 4 inches or so for that waistband thing, I should hit right about where my natural waistline is. So that's my goal. If it's a little bit too much, it'll just give me more movement. So that's not a big deal to me. So anyhow, that is how I would fix the pattern. If I was ever to do this again, now my pattern is adjusted, so I think that it would fit me better, I'm assuming. So now let me put this away, and I will show you how I'm going to fix my dress. Knowing what you know now, and having watched putting this whole dress together, what I need to do is give myself more room right here. I am not going to be taking all of this off. I just don't want to. And what I'm going to do instead is open up my shoulders and do an insert in the shoulders. And it's going to take a little while, but I've come this far, you know, and you guys picked this this pattern out of my selection. Well, the majority of you did. I will be doing the other ones too. And so I really want to show you how to make it work. So I'm going to go carefully with my, you know, razor blade and seam ripper and everything, and take all of this apart and open up some stitching here for a couple inches, just so I can have access to all of that. So I will be right back. Actually, I did just buy a new seam ripper. It looks dangerous. But this will be a good time to try it out. So if you're curious, stay tuned and I will tell you if I like it or not. But this is the dangerous beast that is my new seam ripper. So far it's extremely sharp. I really like it. So I need to do a little extra in here, but this is just like a scalpel. It's like a curved X-Acto type razor blade. It's got this little tip, so you can really, you know, get in there in the tight little places. So no, I like it. I'm able to, what I don't like running the old seam rippers through things, because, you know, there's always a chance for slicing. I like to be able to put gentle pressure and just kind of click it. And this is just cutting through it like butter. So far so good. Yep, at this point I can say I recommend. I got this on the 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐞 website catalog, and it comes with a second blade that's flat that you can use for cutting buttonholes. You know, I haven't used that yet, but looks fun. So anyhow, I like it. This is the little precision seam ripper, so you know, would recommend at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and put this aside so I don't cut myself. What I need to do is basically cut a piece of green and a couple pieces of purple that are going to be the same dimensions as this, but that's going to be 4 inches long or 4 inches wide. Because remember, I added 1.5 inches on to each side, the front and the back, when I was adjusting the pattern. And so I want this to be basically that same amount added onto it, so I can see what the final fit is going to be if I use that on my pattern. You know what I mean? Because if I make this shorter, I won't be able to judge if I need to adjust my paper pattern. Anyhow, with all that, let me get a piece of green fabric out and I'll show you how I'm going to draft this little piece. Okay, so before I get my fabric and everything out, I want to talk strategy here for a minute. Corduroy looks like a different color based on the direction it is. So if for this little scrap here, if this is the top this way, it's going to look different this way, okay? Now, both of my pieces I cut, so top and top here. At the point where it meets on the shoulder, they intersect, okay? So it changes direction at that point. Now, if I'm adding an insert up here, at the point, one or the other is going to match, basically, you know, because one piece of corduroy can't have two directions. So I'm going to match directionally with the corduroy with my front piece. I think that will be less obvious than if I do it with the back piece, okay? So I'll keep this handy, but I'm going to base my extension off of this piece. So I have this little piece of fabric here with lines on it, and this is up. When I held this up to my dress, in order to get it to match directionally with this, that has to be up, okay? So what I'm going to be doing is adding 3 inches plus seam allowance up here, because that'll give me what I've done with my pattern, which is 1.5 inches in the front and 1.5 inches in the back, okay? And I'm just going to do one side at a time. I'll do one and then I'll just cut out a second mirror image of it. So I'm getting this set here so that this edge is along the grid line and my green line here is also along a grid line. So we know everything is lined up how it needs to be. Just going to stick a pin right here just to kind of hold it how I need it to be. Now, I'm going to fold this edge under 5/8 of an inch. All right, that's going to give me the line for my seam line. So let me hold that down with my ruler and draw along there. Okay, if that is my seam line, I'll be needing to add a seam allowance to that. I'm also going to be drawing a little line here where this edge needs to continue. I'm just going to skip this line for a moment and focus on this line over here. And I'm just going to extend it several inches, okay? Now, from here, I want to make sure that I have 3 inches available before my next seam line. Okay, and now I can take my back piece and I will fold it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Crease it right there. And I can place this right here. And that way I can see if these two were to be sewn together, at what point does this need to end? And that is going to be right here, okay? So then I can draw a line from this point to this point and extend it a little bit, okay? So this is a sewing line. That's a sewing line. I need to add a 5/8 inch seam allowance for cutting line up there, and I also need to add one down here. Okay, so now I have my insert, which is from here, here, here. The seam allowances are already built into the sides there, so I can just go ahead and cut that out. And then I can see on here what the grain line is because it's kind of like diagonal, and I will just lay this on top of another piece at the same diagonal. So let me go ahead and cut this. And before I lose track, down here in the seam allowance that'll be sewed onto the front, I'm drawing an F. Okay, that way I know that that is the one that goes onto the front. The other one is the one that's going to be sewed onto the back. So now I have this. So what I need to do is take this, flip it upside down, match up the grain lines, and because it's corduroy, I can see where the grain lines are. But let's see here. This ruler is pretty much along a grain line, okay? So I can match that up with the grain lines on here. It's pretty good. Move my pin down here and cut out my second piece. And am I going to be serging around these pieces? Yes, yes I am. Because this is not lined, they will be exposed, so they will end up fraying if I do not. So before I do that though, when I open this up like this, I'm going to go ahead and draw the letter F at the bottom of this piece. So I also know that that is the fronts. These are sides. I am going to draw the registration mark, which is where this little arrow is pointing. Hang on a second. I'm going to do it on the seam, okay, not down here at the edge, just because it's easier at this point. But where that little arrow is pointing, I'm going to draw that. And that way I can make sure that I put the right one on the right side. So if I do the same here, where this little arrow is pointing, if you can see, I'm just going to draw that little registration mark right there. Okay, and that way I can still see those notches on my dress because they're there. And so when I go to sew it on, I can make sure that they're on the right place. But when I serge around it, you know, we're all still good. So let me go serge these right now. All right, put those little pieces aside. I need to work on my little purple straps. So doing the same thing, this is my front piece. I'm going to crease it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I have that stitching line to start with. My fabric I have placed on my table so that my straight of my fabric is pretty well with the straight of my grid here, okay? The straight of grain here, I need to make sure that it is on the same straight. So I'm going to place it right about here. Okay, so this arrow is lined up also. Put a little ruler there. And again, I'm going to trace this at my stitching line. Okay. And again, I am working on extending this front line. Okay, it's coming up this way. I'm just going to go like that for a ways, okay? Now, this is my back piece that's going to be hooking on this way. So I want to add 3 inches to my overall length. Right about here, here, and here. And I want to line this edge up over here. Whoops, no I don't. I want to fold my seam allowance. Thank you for reminding me. I could hear you through my camera saying seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm folding this. And so at this point right here is where I need to have those lines intersect. So now I'm going to draw a line from this point to that point. Okay, so again, I'm going to put my little letter F down here. I'm going to add 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to that front. I'm going to add 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to the back. Okay, the sides will stay the same. And go ahead and cut this one out. hoping that this is going to work well, you know. Now, we need 4 of these. We only needed 2 of the other, but we actually need 4 of these. So I need to cut 2 of them going this way and 2 of them upside down. So I'm going to go ahead, just kind of place it so that the grain line is matching up with the grain line on here. Cut another one with the right side up. Hoping for the best, you know. Put my letter F down here. Okay, so I'm going to put that one aside, and then I'm going to flip this upside down, still placing it so that my grain line is moved. It's more like this, so that it is in line with the grain line. I think if I turn it this way, it'll make more sense. So yeah, so I can see that this is the grain line, that's the grain line, all is good. It kind of wants to stick like a flannel graph, so that's good. I'm going to go ahead and cut this one. And again, when I peel it open, I will draw the letter F down there at the bottom. And one more upside down. Again, I'm just going to fold it on my grain line. That's the easiest way, I think, to match it up to the grain line on my corduroy. Fold it back down, cut this one out, mark the letter F, and I will be ready to sew it together. I actually debated for a minute if I was going to interface these, but I am, because I went back and grabbed the front just to see if it made a difference. And I can tell it does make it somewhat crisper and everything. And so I think it would be noticeable if this part right here was squishy. So yes, I am going to hand-based interfacing onto these tiny little patch pieces. I will be doing the same thing where I outline my seam allowance with my pen and baste around the edges after clipping my corners, okay? Okay, so I have all of these taken apart, okay, and I'm going to sew my 3 pieces on. I have 1 green, 1 interfaced band, and 1 non-interfaced band. So the first thing I'm going to tackle is the green, and I have my little mark for my notch, which I can see to match up there. So I can make sure this is going to go in the right place. I'm going to pin it on, so at my 5/8 inch seam allowance here, and where that notch is, it's going to match up. Previously, I had trimmed this edge, so that edge will not be matching up, but I'm just going to assume everything else is good. Pin this and sew it straight across at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so this one is out of the way here. Now I'm getting my interfaced side with my little letter F there, so I know that is the front piece. And before I actually start sewing it, I will, hang on a second, let me just pin this on here really quick. I will open this up and make sure that the grain lines are going all the same way, and they are, so I know that I'm doing it right. So I'll go ahead and pin this on and sew it straight across at 5/8. You know, same thing. One of the edges is trimmed already, but c'est la vie. And then the last one is this one. Now, I don't, oh no, I have the F marked on there too. I thought I didn't. But if I hadn't had it on there, I could just place it on top and figure out what is the bottom here. So now I'm going to flip this over, open up this side, and place this one with my little front part matching up at the 5/8 inch seam allowance down here. So those edges right there meet up. Gonna pin it and sew this one. So I'm going to go over to the machine and sew all 3 of these at 5/8 of an inch straight across. And from there, go straight over to my ironing board and press all 3 of these seam allowances open. All right, so here they are, all sewed up and seam allowances pressed open. So I'm going to be doing some hand stitching here. I think that's the best way to try to make some kind of a continuity here. So what I'm going to do is where this was turned under before, I'm just going to continue that. And I'm not going to be sewing it all the way up, only probably about halfway up my patch. I want to leave the top part open so I can connect the back pieces to it there. But up here, I have it pressed under at 5/8 of an inch. And I'm going to try to lay this so that my seam is matched up there, right about here. That looks good to me. So I'm going to stick a pin up here at the top point that I want to have it connected. This down here at the midpoint. I'm going to flip it upside down to make sure that I'm in there at 5/8, and it looks like it's not. It looks like this green part got scooched down some. So let me scoot it in a little more. Try it one more time. And that looks better. See, at this point, the green and the purple are at the same level, so that's good. So I'm going to come back with a needle and thread and just carefully stitch it right from this point down to where it's open down here. Now I've already done this on the other side, just wanting to see how it was going to work out. Okay, so again, from this point up it's open, but I just made some, they're pretty much invisible on this corduroy, just little stitches, little whip stitches, just catching, you know, a thread or 2 of the purple and then going down underneath to connect the purple onto the green part there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. Okay, so I have this part stitched on here. You know, the top part is still open. And now I need to deal with the 2 seams, the seams between the 2 purple pieces. So I am turning on the wrong side, turning this thing inside out so I can reach down here where it is still sewed together. Okay, my stitches are still holding their own right here. And that's where I'm going to start my stitching. So I have it pinned, them pinned together right here. I'm going to go ahead and stretch it out, pin it together up here. And again, I'm going to leave the top 1.5 inches or so open. Okay. So with my sewing machine, I'm going to start here and sew straight up, following that stitch line that I can still see where I pulled it out. And then at this point, where all my new stuff is, this will be a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And it'll go straight to about this point right here. Alrighty, so with that done, I have again pressed under the edge. Just, this is the inside of my green, just kind of put it where I want it to be here. And I'm going to go ahead with my needle and thread and slip stitch it from about this point, you know, leaving about 1.5 inches up here at the top, all the way down to the point where it's still attached to my bodice. You know, actually when I was over at my sewing machine, I sewed this all the way to the end by accident, but now I'm thinking that's a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other one, sewing this up all the way and sewing this one up all the way, leaving this one open. Okay, so I'm just going to do the rest of my stitches up to the top. This is the front, okay? The back I'm leaving open. The front I am closing up all the way to the top. You know, we're just kind of winging this on the fly, but that's my new strategy. All right, so now I am working on my back. This is my back piece, and I am opening up my seams enough that I can flip the seam allowances upright, because you can see like right here, they're sewn down. So on this one, I've already opened it up about that much, so I can make sure my seam allowances are straight up and put them together. And again, just like the front, the only one that I am not sewing all the way up is this very back one where the back facing is going to be coming up to the back side of my bodice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew all the way up this seam and also this one. Once I open these seam allowances open, I'll sew that one all the way up too. So now that these are sewn up, I'm going to go ahead and put my front here, sew it onto my back, match up the corner here. Do my best to match up this point where the purple and green have its transition. Right here. Because I want them to, as close as possible, make that a seamless line, you know. If the purple's not jagged over, it'll look better. And then over here on this side, taking it all the way to this side and then working out the difference. I also want to try to make these two seams line up. So just kind of open that up so that those will match somewhat. Somehow one of my purples got sticking out farther than the others. I don't think that's a big deal at this point, so I'm just going to kind of ignore it until I'm done and see if it goes away, as I do, with a hopeful, optimistic thought. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this starting at 5/8 here, come all the way around this way. So I'm kind of going to have to like wrap it as I'm sewing it, kind of turn, you know, but I will be able to stitch it on my sewing machine. Okay, so this is it. I stitched it all the way. Went to my ironing board and kind of pressed it open the best I could, folded this down to try to get this edge as even as I could, and then pressed it flat again. All right, I have not even looked at the right side yet. At this point, hoping for the best, we will get there soon. While this is here flat, I'm going to go ahead and tuck in the edge so that it's going to come up to where that stitching line is. Pin it down and whip stitch this under so that this facing edge will be, you know, held in nice and neat, just like the rest of it from here to here. You can really see that color change right there, can't you? Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, so this is where we are at this point. I feel like I have spent an entire day doing nothing, but, you know, at least I'm going to end up with a dress that fits. Now, if you did the pattern alterations on the paper pattern like I did, you are not going to have this extreme plunging neckline because I had to add all of that extra up here. It makes this a lot lower, okay? I will probably end up just wearing a tank top or a camisole or something underneath here. I will have, you know, little laces and everything going across. I could put an insert in there, you know, just to be like a little insert of something underneath there. We'll see. We'll see. At this point, I am just happy that I have a dress that I think will be decent enough to wear, fitting well enough, and so there you go. So by adding the length up here, it basically dropped it all, okay? But that's okay. We can deal with it. But you can see, doing this kind of shot now, the fullest part of my bust is fitting above this band at a place where I thought it was going to based on the pattern drawing. So I'm going to call it a day for today. I have a whole lot of things I need to get taken care of downstairs and other places, and I will be back later. See you later. Okay, welcome to the next day, and it's time to get started with the zipper. And the zipper that I am going to use, it's the one that I have that I think fits closer with this fabric color and length, is this one, which is an invisible zipper. You know it's an invisible zipper if the side that the pull is on, you don't see any teeth, okay? The back side has teeth. On the standard zippers, the front has the teeth and the back side looks like this. But this is an invisible zipper and it's a lot longer than what they call for. They call for, where are you? A 14-inch zipper. This is closer to a 22-inch zipper. That's fine with me. It'll just unzip lower on the hip, and for me that means it'll be easier to get into. You know, the more space the better to get into for me. So I'm going to be putting this in a little bit different, obviously, because when they in the directions are going to have you put it in, one, they're having you use a standard zipper. It just, you know, a center set standard zipper, but they're also having you do it after you have the sleeves and everything. And to me, again, the whole reason I'm doing it this way is because I think it's a lot easier to put in a zipper this way, you know. So the first thing that I am going to do is get my tape. Again, this is a water-soluble, double-sided basting tape. It has paper on one side. So you stick it on, peel off the paper, and then stick it in place. So let me go ahead and get everything situated here. Okay, so here is another thing. Typically, I would be wanting to place my zipper so that I am going to be having where it closes at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, okay? But because this dress, being the tight, weird kind of fit that it is, I actually want to give myself the smallest possible seam allowance on it. Okay, I had to make that mark. So instead of placing my tape out far enough so that that's going to happen, I'm actually going to align the very edge of this tape with the serged edge of my fabric. And I have gone ahead and just serged over these side pieces. Those were still raw before, so I've serged those and picked out the basting stitches that were visible, just because I want to get fairly close to that. So where this mark is, there's a dot on the pattern, and that is where the top of the zipper is supposed to be. So I'm going to place my zipper face down. Okay, and I'm going to start on this side over here. And when I line it up, I still have to put tape on this, but when I line it up, I'm going to want to make sure that the top of this zipper is where this dot is. But I'm going to be placing it so the very edge of the tape is aligned over here. Okay, but before I can do that, what I need to do is on this side, which is the right side of it, put a row of my double stick basting tape all the way down, because I am going to be sewing the entire zipper. Oops, I just pulled a pin out from somewhere. Just putting it all the way down, pressing it down really firmly, and then peeling off that paper backing. So I got it on, and I'm going to try to very carefully pull this paper backing off. Sometimes it's a bit finicky. Okay, so now turning my zipper, here's the pull, turning it upside down like this. I'm going to lower it down so that where this is, where the little metal stopper is, it's lined up with that dot that was on the pattern that's right here, okay? And now starting it there, I'm just going to move it down the edge, lining up the edge fairly close to that serge. You might see some threads sticking out, but in general, I'm trying to get it fairly close to that serged edge. All the way down here. And you can see the end of the zipper is going to be pretty far down. That does not bother me one bit, because honestly, getting in and out of dresses with side zippers, it's not my favorite thing, so this will help. Okay, so now that this is stuck in place, I am going to go ahead and go stitch it. Oh, I forgot to iron it. Okay, I am gonna wing it. Usually, I wasn't paying attention, but usually on an invisible zipper, I try to unzip them and iron them first to flatten out this coil some, and that helps with the whole sewing on process. But since I already have this stuck on here, I don't want to undo it. So I will just, as I stitch it, uncoil it carefully as I stitch it. I'm going to be using my invisible zipper foot, and I think I'll show you that over on my machine. Okay, so this is my invisible zipper foot. You can see it's got a couple grooves in there, so you can take your pick of which one you need. For me, I am going to be sewing down this way, and I want my stitches to be just on this side of that coil, so I'm going to be using, flip it around the right way, this first groove here and have that run over my coils. And like I said, because I forgot to iron it ahead of time, I'll just try to go nice and slow and very carefully pull the coil out with my finger as I go. So let me go ahead and pop this foot onto my machine. Come on. Alright, so I've got those threads pulled through the foot. I'm going to try to place my dress underneath here. Hold these two threads in the beginning so they don't want to tangle up, and get started. Now, coming over this part, it's very thick, so you might have to kind of tug it and guide it as you go to make sure everything's going to work well. I don't know why that pin is still there. And again, this would have been better if I had ironed it first, because these coils would want to lay out of the way a lot better. I think this foot is pretty good at spreading it out for me, but you know, it is what it is. So I'm not going to be able to go all the way down. I'm just going to get to where that pull is and stop, do a couple back stitches, and call that good. So let me pull this off here and turn it so that from the right side now, if I was to zip this up, okay, where it's sewed, it's just going to look like a rolled edge there. Okay, so now before I sew the other side, I am actually going to go ahead, unzip this again, and iron these teeth a little bit flatter on this side, just kind of pushing them over and ironing them like that, just to make it easier before I tape this down to sew the other side of my zipper on. Alright, I ironed it, but it's kind of pointless at this point because I actually am going to zip it up again really quick, and that might undo what I just did, but such is life. I'm zipping this up right now, and again, usually once you iron it you don't, because that returns the coils. But I want to mark where these points are, where the purple and green join, where the purple and gold join, and where the gold and green join. Okay, now this part here, actually I'm not going to be able to use that, but it's close enough that I can then put my pen on the back side and draw it on the back side, because this is going to have that sticky tape on it, but the back side I'll be able to see. So the back of the zipper, I just drew a little line there, and right here. Okay, so I've got those marked now. All right, so I'm going to unzip this and again put my double-sided pasting tape on this side, which is the right side, the side that the little pull is on, okay? I'm going to put it on that side, starting at the top all the way down. Okay, so I have this is the front of my dress. You know, I just have these right side together, the front laying on top of the back, kind of, because that's the easiest way for me to manipulate it so I can place this side of the zipper. So what I'm going to do first is make sure I get these 3 marks lined up right. And so I'm going to put that bottom one down there, the middle one here, top one here. And I'm kind of squishing the fabric in there. It looks like it's a little bit whiter on this side than the other. So I think that will work. I'll just have to make sure. You know, even though I have the sticky tape, just because I really, really, really don't want this to shift, I'm going to stick a pin on top of that sticky tape, just over these 2 parts here. Okay, so now those are safe. I can line up this top one just along the edge, up there, and then the bottom part down the side. Until I get to the bottom of my zipper. Okay, oops, that's in the way. All right, so again, I'm only going to be able to sew up to about this point. The bottom of this is going to be free. That is fine, doesn't bother me one bit. So if you can see where this line is here, my middle line here. It's lined up with the center, and my top line here is lined up with the top, okay? So just like before, I'm going to go back to my sewing machine with my invisible zipper foot and stitch this side on, okay? And I'm going to stitch it from here all the way up to the top. Technically, you should always sew them both the same way, but since I have the tape on, it's kind of like basting. And when you have something basted, it's not as critical that you're sewing in the correct direction, because the basting is going to hold it a lot more securely than pins are. So I am going to sew it from bottom to top, but that's because I have my sticky tape on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, I got that done. So now I'm going to zip it up here and hope for the best. See how we do. Well, that matches up pretty well. I'm happy with that. Now, at this point, the top part, I'm going to need to close this up, and below where my zipper ends, I need to close that up also. So let me work on the top part first. Okay, so it's zipped up. This is still open, and I just kind of took it to the ironing board, just lightly steamed this just so I could get those zipper coils to relax. And what I noticed is that what is this? The front side is like a 1/4 inch taller than the back side. And I think that has to do with the way I had to move things around to get these stripes to match up. Now I can tell you, it is a whole lot easier just to adjust the sewing line for putting on the sleeve. It's a lot easier just to make that quick little adjustment when I'm stitching it on than to get down here, have one of these up a 1/4 inch higher than the other when you're putting your zipper in and everything. So I highly recommend putting in your zipper first, then sewing it up here, and then sewing it below, okay? But I ironed it just really quickly so I could see where it was naturally going to want to fold, because I don't have a 5/8 seam allowance here. I have something else. So now that I can see where that fold wants to be, I'm just going to match it up where that is, and one side is slightly longer than the other. That's okay. That's not going to bother me. I just wanted to make sure that I had it so it was going to look right on the outside. So now I can pin it, and again, I don't know if you can see, there's a little slight fold line right here, and I have a slight fold line on the other side, and those are the things that I am matching up. So you can kind of see right here where the top of my zipper stitching is. I'm just going to stick this under my machine and stitch from right here all the way up to the top, and then press this open. Okay, so I've got it stitched together, press that little bit open. You know, because an invisible zipper has the curly coils, it's not perfectly straight, but you know what? That's my armpit. Absolutely nobody is going to be inspecting a seam 1/4 inch from my armpit, so I'm fine with that. So now I need to come down here and work on the bottom of my zipper. Okay, so it's going to be pretty much the same thing. Remember, I didn't sew all the way to the very bottom. I've got a little bit of leeway here. So I'm going to fold it over so I can fold this right sides together. And at the point where my zipper is not sewed, I'm just going to try to pull it up and out of the way and take off this tape that's down here so it doesn't get me hung up on anything. Just a little excess tape. And let me go ahead and pin these two sides of my bottom skirt together. Again, the most important thing is this point here where the two colors change. I want to make sure that those two match up exactly. So I'm going to put a pin right there. And once I have that placed, then come back up, just drop something on the floor, come back up here and pulling this zipper kind of up and out of the way, matching these up. Now it looks like one side is slightly longer than the other. Again, not a big deal. I will just bend it so that I can pin it in the most natural place. And as I sew it, just work to kind of ease that one side in, okay? So again, here, bending that, gonna pin it here. Okay, so when I'm sewing it, let me flip this over here. I'm actually needing to look at it on this side. Sometimes it is very difficult to get your zipper foot way up here. I like to use a narrow foot. It can get me as close as possible. But if I can't, if I have like a 1/4 inch between my final stitching on my zipper and where my new stitching starts, it's not a big deal. It usually doesn't show at all. And if it does look like it's something that can bother you, come back with a matching thread and a needle and just put a couple little hand stitches in there, and that'll take care of it. So I'm going to start stitching right here. I'm going to try to start my stitches parallel to where my final stitches are that sewed my zipper on. So I'll be starting at about that same area. I'm just going to draw a line because it was not at 5/8 of an inch. It's closer to like 3/8. Okay, and so that's going to give me a little guideline of where I need to get started. So I'm going to sew that down and all the way to the bottom. Now, one other thing, usually when I'm easing things in, I like to try to put the bigger side on the bottom because the feed dogs can do the work. Because of everything and how sewing machines are situated and everything, it'll be easier to sew it this way, okay? But that means that the side I need to ease in is on this side. What I do when it's on the top is usually I'll hold it and I will pull this part out. So as I'm sewing it, I'll put like these fingernails up here to hold it in place. And with these, I'll be stretching it out that way as I sew it. And just by stretching it out some, it tends to pull those threads that are going this direction tighter together. And so it'll do the same thing. If you don't have a whole lot to ease in, that works. And it should work with this amount without a problem. So I got this part matched up, and then the bottom, wherever the bottom falls, it falls, and it looks like it's pretty much perfect. So that's good. Okay, so I'm over here at my ironing board and I wanted to show you how the zipper works. So from here, it's way down, it's gonna end, the zipper's gonna end down near my knees. I can go ahead and pull it up all the way. You know, when it really pulls, yeah, you might see a little bit of green, but I'm not going to worry about that. That's going to be under my arm anyway. So that's how it is. I think that having the longer zipper is going to make it pretty easy to put this on. I am hoping. I only actually have one other retro, it's a retro 60s dress that has a side zipper in it, and I don't wear it very often, but you know, it's doable. It does make it doable to get in, but it's a little more complicated. So now I need to go ahead and sew the other side closed, which is a whole lot easier than all of that. All I need to do is make sure that I have my stripes matched up here, my stripe down here matched up. If there is any easing to do, you know, do that in between. You know, it looks like there is a little bit, but you know, no, it's not. It's pretty good. And go ahead and just stitch this. And again, up here at the top, I am going to stitch this at 3/8 of an inch just because I want to give myself a little bit more breathing room up here. Okay, so I just wanted to try it on, see what we got here. Now, there's a couple things. First of all, because I extended this so much, it kind of tweaked my armholes so that this is not perfect. But you know what? It's a very full sleeve. I'm going to make it work, you know. It is a little bit loose up here. Easy fix would be to put shoulder pads in, but once I get the sleeves on, I'll see what I need to do there. But as you can see, extremely plunging low. So you can see my little tank here. But I think that that's because I lowered it by 1.5 inches when I was adding space up here. If you add space down below, and this comes up by 1.5 inches, you won't have this problem. It'll be actually, instead of, this would be actually where it should be. I lowered it, but if you do what I do, it'll be higher. So, you know, figure out your own. But it's doable. I can get into it. I can move around here, and that's important to me right now. So I'm going to call that really good for right now. The next part, the final part, is just sleeves and hem, and of course grommets and this little front treatment here. I need to run outside and take care of some things. We're having a blizzard right now. I'm going to take the camera out so you can see my snow. It is winter. Once again, so much winter. So, just thought I would share that. Let me take care of a few things and we will finish up the dress. Okay, so I am about to cut out my sleeve. Now, this sleeve has dots up here that they intend for you to, well, you can't really see there. On this little diagram, you can kind of see how they intend for some gathering stitches up on top. At this point, I am assuming because I added about that much space at the top of my shoulder, that I'm not going to have much of any kind of gathering stitches up there. So I am not going to be running gathering stitches. If anything, I may have a little bit of ease, but even that might be iffy at this point. So what I am going to do is go ahead and serge around each of my pieces and clip my notches so I know where the top is and which side is the back and the front. And I am going to actually right now with my white pen mark a letter B on the back corner here of the back side so I can make sure that I know that this is the back and this is the front. All right, now that I have clipped up here and I have serged all the way around this piece, I'm just going to sew up this seam. You know, I'm just matching it up, top and bottom and the notch, sewing it at 5/8 of an inch and then coming back and pressing it open. Alrighty, so I've got my sleeves sewn up, I've got my seam allowances pressed open here. And before I put these into my dress, I want to do the bottom part. It'll just be a whole lot easier to do that now than, you know, fumbling around with a huge dress attached to it. So basically these have a casing on the bottom and elastic that feeds through. I have chosen to use, I think they call for 1/4 inch elastic. I'm not too sure. Usually they do. I'm going for something thicker because, you know, it's corduroy. I want to make sure that it has enough oomph to it that if I want to push these thick corduroy sleeves up, you know, to my arms while I'm working on things, that I can do that and the elastic won't just die on me. So what they want you to do is measure your wrist, add 1 inch, and use that to cut your elastic. I'm gonna give myself a little bit of looseness here. If I do a really tight thing, my wrist is 6 inches. I'm gonna actually do 7 inches, add 1 inch to that. So I'm gonna cut 2 pieces of this at 8 inches long. So now that that is cut, what I'm gonna need to do is make a casing at the bottom of my sleeves that's gonna be wide enough that I can fit this through. Okay, so this is a fairly long sleeve, all right? And just to make my life easier, I'm gonna give myself enough room in my casing that I can fit this through with my bodkin pretty easily. So what I'm gonna be doing is actually making a fold up 1 inch and then tucking it under. Just tucking that serged in under and sewing it. But as usual, before I do that, what I'm going to do is come back with some stitch witchery, about 3 inches or so, and put a strip on each side, so a 3-inch strip on each side under the seam allowance, and iron that to glue those down so that when I'm feeding my elastic through, I won't have any of that happening, you know. Alrighty, so I have got it sewed all the way around. Here's my little opening here. Get my bodkin. Love bodkins. I love that word bodkin. Isn't that a fun word? Bodkin. Anyway, I've got these fused down so they're not going to give me any trouble. So I'm just going to go ahead and work my way around trying to make sure that my elastic is going to stay flat. And before it gets too far, just pin this tail up here so it's not going to go anywhere. And work my way around until I have my little end coming out the other side. You can see that it's gathering it quite a bit here. So it's quite a full sleeve that's being put onto all of this elastic, which is nice. I like big, comfortable sleeves. All right, so now I got my end peeking out again. And give me a second to get all of this straightened out. Now look at that. That is a whole lot of gathering there. I might have even been tempted to go ahead and make my elastic just a tiny bit even longer, but you know, at this point it is what it is. So I've pulled these out. I'm just going to overlap them and stitch them. You know, they're thin enough, it's no need to do anything fancy. So I'll just, with a needle and thread, come back, stitch the sides, put an X in the middle, and call that good. Okay, so now that I have that all stitched together, I'm just going to pop it in there and come back with my needle and thread and slip stitch this opening here closed, and my sleeves will be ready to put onto my dress. So let's see if you can see it a little bit better. Lots and lots of gathers there, but when I put it around my wrist, you know, I think that it's still going to fit pretty comfortably, so that's good. Okay, I want to show you, I was just kind of test fitting one of my sleeves in here. I got my bottom pinned and matched up, I got my notches, and I have my center top, and my center top is now the center of this little inset part that I did. But even with adding this much, I'm still going to need to go back and run some gathering stitches because this is much more than I would feel comfortable just, you know, manually easing in. So that's good news for me at least. So I'm going to go ahead, run some gathering stitches from basically about 1 inch above each notch, back and forth over the cap of the sleeve. I'm going to run 2 rows of those gathering stitches up here, and I'm do that for both sleeves, and I will be right back. Okay, so what I need to do now, this is my sleeve. I have my double row of gathering stitches on here, and when I was putting them in, I had the right side up, which means the wrong side are my bobbin threads. And those are the ones that I want to pull when I am gathering. It just goes a lot better all the way around. So I'm putting a pin up here at that center top notch so that it'll be easier to see in a minute. But before I actually set this into my dress, I am just going to grab my bobbin threads and give it a tug and just work these gathers all the way up to that center. So we'll have like a little bit of texture along the way. I think I'll do one more little tug. If I pull too much right now, that's okay, because when I'm actually setting it in, it'll be easier to adjust some fullness out than to be tugging and everything while it's in. Because what I'm trying to do is actually get some kind of a little sleeve cap shape in my sleeve before I set it in. Just gonna get all these gathering threads out of the way here. Now I'm going to slide this inside my dress so I have right sides together. And I'm putting this in on my zipper side, you know, making sure my back of my sleeve is at the back of the dress and the front of my sleeve is at the front of my dress. I'm going to match up that center bottom first. And then there's little notches on either side, so I will match up those notches. Looks like a little bit of easing, but not a huge amount. Pinning this. All right, so now that I have these two notches pinned also, I'm going to go ahead and work my way up to the top and pin my center top. Now my center top is the midpoint between these two, so right about here. Because remember, I put that patch in up there. So I'm going to match up where that pin is to the midpoint here, call that my center top, and pin it in. And at this point, I just have to adjust gathers, pin my sleeve head and everything in. Now it looks like I pulled my gathering threads a little bit too tight here, but that's okay. It's not difficult to just work them out. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this. Once I get it all pinned together, I'm going to sew this seam all the way around at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, once I have that done, I'll come back in this lower part between the notches and do a second row of stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'll have 2 rows of stitching down here at the bottom. I have done this side over here, so you can see there are, you know, here's at my notch. There's the second row of stitching coming down, but the rest of it is just a single row all the way around. Okay, now my sleeve, my armhole is like huge compared to what the pattern called for, you know, because I added that extra 3 inches at the top. So I will have plenty of room to move my arm around. So I'm not going to be clipping this bottom seam down here. Okay, if you have not adjusted yours that way and you try it on, you might want to make some little clips going down to this first row of stitching, you know, just little clips this way, or hitting it with some pinking shears or something. I'm not going to do that because I think I'm going to have plenty of room in here to move around. So okay, so now I'm going to tackle my hem, which is going to be just a very basic hem. This is flat, doesn't have a curve to it, so I am really just going to fold it up about 1/2 inch and then fold it up about 1 inch. Just like that, press it, and then top stitch it along this edge here with hopefully a matching thread. Call that good. All right, so with the hem done, sleeves done, it's finally time to deal with the fun part up here. And I am going to put a little inset. I'm just gonna cut a piece of this, hem it up at the top, and I'm gonna place it strategically on the inside trim it, whip stitch it in just so it's going to be nicely in place, okay? But I want to do my eyelets first, and then I'll do this after. That'll make it a lot easier. So on here you can see the eyelets go pretty far up. I would say, you know, if this is collarbone level here, it's a couple inches below. And so I have my little piece, and I'm just gonna place it on top. I can kind of feel where the seam allowances are, and I'm gonna put a little mark. So putting one. Okay, so this is my top one here. And those are kind of visible. I can kind of see that. Again, this pen, it's not the best, but you know, it does work fairly well. So now I'm going to line it up over here. And again, I am starting it with this dot just a little bit above the bottom. Trying to put a seam allowance on each side here. Yeah, this side did not work out. Come on. Show up for me. All right, that shows up a little bit better. So I'm actually going to use my little grommet punch over there. It makes it a lot easier. I do have a hand one, but you know, I love my big leverage one a lot better. So okay, so this is my grommet setter, and the one that I have, it's just a kind of a generic one I got on eBay several years ago, so I do not remember the actual seller, but they do, you know, sell them in all different kinds of places. Now what's cool about these is you can do all different sizes. There's a top die and a bottom die, okay? And so depending on the dies you have in is the grommets. So I have 3 different dies, and the grommet that I'm going to be using is actually, screw this back in here, the smallest one. I have these all the way up to the big old rings that you use in like sales and things like that. So I did a little tester just to see what it would be like, and it is a very shiny brass that I'm doing. Okay, so there's, before I use the grommets, this little bottom here is spring loaded. This basically will punch my hole first and then set the grommet in. I'm going to start up on this top one here, try to line it up so my spot is right in the middle of my band where I want it. And that looks pretty good, and punch it down. Okay, so that is punching a hole. All right, so there's my hole. Now on the outside, these are 2 parts. There is the more 3-dimensional side, and then the little flat washer type side. So I put the bigger one through and push it through that hole and flip it over so I can get the little grommet to come through. Come on. Okay, so I have that coming all the way through. Hope you can see that. Then I put the little washer thing over the top, and I'm going to set this. It's hard to do this at an angle so that I can have the camera there. I'm going to set this back over that little die at the bottom. Make sure my little washer is pushed down so that the lip of the bigger piece is coming through, and then push this back down all the way. Okay, and that rolls the washer edge down, and it's going to hold that ring on real tight. So there you have it. I do have a hand one that does not have the back rings, but I highly recommend the kind that has a back ring. That's a 2-part grommet. You can do it without them, but it makes it very very prone for scratching and for thread issues and things like that. So I am just going to work my way down, continue to punch holes, set grommets, and just that way, all the way down both sides. All right, so I have this inside out here, and I think the best way to put my little insert on is by hand. And when I lace this up, it's for decoration. You know, even on their, come on, even on their picture, they show it very open and loose, and that's pretty much my goal. So I am going to be putting this so that if my piece here was as open as it is right now, you know, it would lay flat. I don't want to cinch that in. But, you know, if it cinches a little, that's fine. So if I just lay this on top, I can kind of see where these sides are going to be. Like that, and I'm actually going to draw these on here. And down here at the bottom. Okay, so that gives me my template. I'm just going to come back and trim it, you know, about 1/2 inch or so outside of that line. Not an exact science, because literally it's kind of like applique. I'm just going to turn under the edge and whip stitch it in there. Okay, so now I have this here. I'm just going to put it back where it needs to be to get started here. And see, this way it's below the top little guys. I think that that's fine. So I'm just going to put a few pins to hold it to the band and keep it steady while I just literally sit here like applique and turn under a side and whip stitch it in. So I have it all put on, just big old ugly whip stitches, but I think that they're going to be secure enough to keep it in place. So now if I turn it right side out, this is what it's going to look like from the front. Looking quite Mardi Gras-ish, you know? Very Mardi Gras-ish. So what I need to do now is figure out what I'm going to be threading through here. I have some ribbon, I have some gold braid. The gold braid is very festive, and this is feeling more and more like a festive kind of thing. Let's see what it would look like. You know what? Why not? I'm going to use this gold braid. Give me a minute. Okay, do we have volume? Yes, we do. So it's done, and finished product. I think it's extremely festive, you know, and it is comfortable. I have been making, usually the dresses I've been making lately have been so full and so much fabric that this actually does not have that much comparatively, and it's light, and I like that. So, you know, the whole deal with extending the torso, I think for the average person, I think is still a good idea. but I like it. So once the holiday season is out and everything, I'll probably pull out my gold cord and put a more subdued ribbon in there, you know. But for right now, I think it's kind of fun. It seems to fit really well. Now I did, you know, extend my shoulders, so that made my armhole bigger, which means I cannot tell you exactly how the armhole as drafted in the pattern will fit. I can tell you that this fits pretty darn comfortable and I have plenty of ease. I'm guessing that if I did it the way that the pattern had, I would be pulling out this much ease and it would still be a fitted armhole, you know. I just have extra room. But the sleeves, you can see plenty of room in the sleeves. The elastic is good. And yeah, I like it. Now, for the length, again, I'm around 5'4"-ish. I did not cut any off the length, okay? So if you can see, it's still kind of T-length on me, which means if you're a very tall person, it would be shorter, okay? Closer to like mid to high calf length. So I like it this length for a winter, a festive dress. I think the colors are bright and cheerful and I like that in the winter. So anyhow, hoped you liked it. Hope it was helpful. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, throughout the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Right barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.